the main photo.
You are.
Oh,
You're in
I
the
am.
you are in the center of my screen.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay. Good evening and welcome. As you may know, the author of In Search of Polin, Chasing Jewish Ghosts in Today's Poland is my brother, Dr. Gary Schiff. I will present to you some of the important history research of Jews who populated Poland, Yiddish and Hebrew, for the country of Poland during centuries before the 20th. Importantly, the author visited Poland to not only further his research, but also to explore the sites where our family had lived for several centuries. For example, he visited the town of Ostromezowica, which is about 50 miles northeast of Warsaw. There is a monument for the hundreds of Jews whom the Nazis slaughtered on November 11th, 1939. One of the photographs included in the book is the author standing next to that monument. An uplifting experience he incorporated into the book is davening from the Amud at the rebuilt, sole surviving shul in Warsaw, at which the world-renowned Chazanim, Gershon Sirota and Moshe Kusevitsky had officiated. My brother has a reputation for having a fine cantorial voice and sang with Moshe Kusevitsky. But my emphasis tonight will be to present some of the historic background of why and when Jews flocked to Poland over many centuries. It is widely known that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and of those, 3 million were Polish citizens. Why were 50% of the Jewish deaths Polish Jews? Obviously, most of the Nazi targets either lived in Poland and or were cruelly, as you know, forced into Poland by the Nazi military. But research shows that for centuries before, while European Jews were elsewhere violently being banished and killed, survivors continuously made their way to Poland. Why there? One of the fascinating research results in Search of Poland answers that question by detailing historical situations. Interestingly, to this day, many of us have surnames that can be traced back to European and particularly Polish-related names. Additionally, many of the Polish surnames of Jews were of Germanic origin, which further reflects past backgrounds of Jews living elsewhere in Europe. When rulers demanded all persons identify their family with surnames, many composed their particular names from German translation or of adaptation from the Hebrew or Yiddish meaning. For example, the name Aronson in lieu of son of Aharon. Other adaptations of last names were based on titles such as Rabbin from rabbi. There are many other indications of Polish Germanic names from occupations related to that family. A few examples: Melamed, teacher, and many secular occupations, such as goldsmith, a jeweler, shechter, from obviously the occupation of a shochet. Importantly, the book makes the point that over the many years of Jewish residency in Poland, our ancestors were permitted to support their families as long as they did not compete directly with various guilds. This was particularly permitted in Poland. One of the many examples provided in my brother's book, In Search of Polin, is related to a family branch of mine with the surname Feinsack, which means fine cloth, such as silk or fine clothes. Historically in Europe, tailoring of silk and other expensive cloths was permissible to Jews since the guilds confined their sales to the masses. hence the name Feinzeig. Likewise, Jews who supported themselves by designing or producing gold jewelry often took the name, as you know, of goldsmith or similarly Goldstein. Physical characteristics also became surnames, such as Grossman, Kleinman, and more. My surname, Schiff, is of German origin, even though the family has lived for hundreds of years in Poland, as detailed in the book. You may know that many people with the name Schiff are Kohanim. As an aside, my brother notes that when our family lived in Germany, the word Khan, a form of Kohen, meant a type of a boat. But the author writes this often got upgraded to ship or Schiff. Many people with the inheritance of being a Kohen incorporated a version of that word into their new name, as you know, such as Cohen or Kahan or Katz, meaning Kohen Tzedek. Major historical aspects covering pre-20th century are answered in this book. Examples include these two questions. What attitude did the church have towards Jews in Poland? And two, how were Jews in Poland treated by non-Jews? The answers to these questions can be called pull factors, which drew many Jews towards Poland over the centuries. Let us answer the first question. What attitude did the church have towards Jews in Poland? The book explains that the church did not want to destroy the Jews per se during the Middle Ages. After all, they were potential converts. And there were times over the centuries when even the occasional papal or other episcopal personage over the centuries, when even occasional papal persons even condemned, quote, unfounded libels and excessive violence against them, end quote, meaning the Jews. Nevertheless, there were renewed attacks at times against Jews in the 1740s and 50s especially, which were the worst period of Catholic-led persecution of Jews until then. Jews were allowed to remain in a city. They had to stay in isolated sections throughout Europe. Examples of countries and names of the Jewish-only quarters follows. France, it was called a Juvier. Spain, Juderia. Germany, Judengasses. And Italy, Ghetto, which, as we know, has remained to this day in our vernacular. Importantly, many do not realize that Jewish ghettos, in particular countries, were designed to control how many Jewish families can live in a particular ghetto by setting the number of weddings permitted, listing minimum ages for marriage and more restrictions, such as the size and number of homes, and in some locales, even the number of rooms. But very significantly, quote, the ghetto per se was never successfully instituted in Poland, at least until the Nazi period. As a matter of historical fact, some Jews lived in Jewish areas, and even some non-Jews lived in Jewish sections of cities in Poland until the Nazi era. Let us return to the second question that I posed. Did Jews experience a different attitude at certain times from Polish non-Jews over the centuries? It seems that, unlike in the rest of Europe, in Poland, the day-to-day contacts between Jews vis-a-vis the general Polish population, quote, were on a more practical human basis than in Western and Central Europe, which may have been the basis for more favorable relationships. This more favorable relationships was one of the motivations that drew Jews over the centuries to settle in Poland. The above delineates another reason why Poland differed from the other nations in Europe, vis-a-vis Jews within their boundaries. At times over the centuries, Poland attracted Jews from all over Europe because Jews learned of a mitigating attitude towards them as documented during certain periods. For example, the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 adopted a Muslim derived anti Jewish law, quote, that Jews be marked with distinctive symbols, colors, or articles of clothing. For example, in France, Jews had to wear a ruelle, a target like design, and in other countries, a pointy or colored hats. This is where obviously Hitler, Yamach Shemam, got all of his ideas from. 300 years later, in 1538, a similar law was passed requiring Jews in Poland to wear pointy hats or shoes, especially painted for quick identification. But this was never implemented in Poland. This was one of the various situations which drew European Jews towards Poland over the centuries. In addition, there were push factors that motivated Jews to relocate to Poland over the centuries. There were a variety of push factors, including natural disasters, which also tended to bring Jews towards Poland during the Middle Ages. One of the most catastrophic natural disasters, which we talk about once in a while nowadays, was the horrific Black Plague, 1346 to 1353, which killed an estimated one-third of the populations in Western and Central Europe, estimated at about 25 million people, and millions more elsewhere. The book's research indicates that the deadliness of the Black Plague affected Poland to a lesser extent. This was fortunate not only for the Jewish population already there, but it also attracted more Jews who sought a safe haven from other lands. As is well known, Jews were accused at various times and places for causing that horror by allegedly poisoning wells, the horror meaning the Black Plague. The book carefully delineates how several of our halachic followings involve sanitary practices, as you know, washing hands, various kashrus prohibitions, and more. And these may have even lessened the effects of that disease. About 200 years before the natural and horrific disaster of the Black Death was the contrived and outlandish charge against Jews, which we all know is termed blood libel. Jews were charged with killing non-Jews, especially children, for their blood to drink or to make matzah. This caused the additional massacres of Jews during the Middle Ages. It first appeared in Norwich, England in 1144, then in Blau, France in 1171, and eventually spread throughout Europe. Were the Jews in Poland affected any differently? Let us now examine the situation in Poland. The author points out that fortunately for Jews, while the Lutheran brand of Protestantism remained the dominant one in Germanic-oriented northern or Baltic Poland, the somewhat less shrilly anti-Jewish Calvinist version became the principal Protestant sect in Poland proper, especially among the nobility. Interestingly, some other denominations, such as the anti-Trinitarian Arians, which we hardly ever hear about, which evinced more sympathy for the Jews, flourished as well in Poland. Eventually, however, during the 1740s and the following 10 years, there was a rise in attacks on Jews because the non-Jews felt an inseparable identification of Polish nationality or ethnicity. Consequently, there was a resultant lessening of religious tolerations in Poland. The pull of religion attracted many Jews to Poland. Thus far, I have shared with you several of the reasons why there was a movement of Jews from all over Europe, Western and Eastern Europe, towards and into Poland from about the 10th through the 17th century. What additional factors were behind the European Jewish pull towards and into Poland? Early rabbis and their institutions of learning, their yeshivas, drew European Jews into Poland. Major rabbis influenced more Jews to move to Poland. Many of the most influential rabbis in Poland were originally from elsewhere in Europe or were descendants of those who came before. A variety are described in the book. I will note only a few here. Rabbi Yaakov Polak, also known as Jacob the Pole, was born in Bavaria and founded the first yeshiva in Poland in Krakow in 1494. He was named the first chief rabbi in 1503. Rabbi Moshe Isser leaves the Ramah, whose version of the Shulchan Aruch is considered authoritative by the Ashkenazim, was the son of a German-born banker to the King of Poland, whose seat was in the royal city of Krakow. An eminent contemporary of the Ramah was Rabbi Shlomo Luria, 1520 to 73, the head of the famous yeshiva of Lublin and the grandson of a rabbi from Erfurt, Germany. By the mid-15th century through early 16th century, there were at least 15 yeshivas in Poland. Those eminent places of Jewish learning continued to motivate Jewish movement toward Poland. Another motivation for Jews moving towards and into Poland were widespread European anti-Semitic attacks. The condition of the Jews in Western and Central Europe began to deteriorate at the start of the First Crusade, 1095 through 1099, as the hordes who formed the Crusaders swarmed towards Jerusalem to gain it for the church. Many Jewish home sites were overrun with a concomitant destruction of multitudes of our Jewish brethren. While many Jewish European sites between Western Europe and the Middle East were rebuilt after the Crusades by 1492, nevertheless, there were continuous decimations of Jewish population sites throughout the Crusader years and in the following centuries. For example, the book cites the Pastoral, or Shepherd's Rampage, in France in 1320 that killed many Jews. This rampage, quote, may well have played a role in triggering the early beginnings of an ever eastward movement over the next 5 centuries, end quote. Economics was a push and a pull factor. For generations, Jews had the opportunity under the Romans, post-Roman, and early Christian rulers to maintain themselves agriculturally. The author points out that Rashi, as all of us know, owned and operated vineyards in the province of Champagne, France. Eventually, this totally changed by the Middle Ages, when the nobility and the church that pervaded medieval society often put Jews in an untenable position. When society considered land as the source of wealth, and Jews were disconnected from same, it was a major exclusion for Jewry in Europe. Jewish resourcefulness, however, somewhat saved the day. The author significantly points out that because Jews consistently regarded land and their frequent expulsions from same as an illiquid commodity, they began to concentrate their capital on more liquid and portable assets, such as precious metals, species of money, and jewels. Since in Western and Central Europe, they were limited to low-paying occupations, the Jews concentrated when possible on minting coins for rulers, exchanging many currencies, and most of all, lending it at interest. Note well that Jews were not allowed to take any valuables, as you know, when expelled, and expulsion was always a threat. For example, in France, Jews were expelled in 1182, recalled in 1198, expelled in 1306, and reinvited in 1315. Jews were expelled and pauperized at the same time. Consequently, as a result of these expulsions, at the end of the 15th century, when relations between Jews and their Christian neighbors in Central and Western Europe were at their worst, hardly any Jews remained in most of the European kingdoms, other than Poland. Interestingly, among the many Sephardi Jews who made their way to the New World, for example, to the early Dutch colonies in Brazil and in the Caribbean, there were some individual Polish Jews. But the mass of overwhelmingly Ashkenazi Jewish expellees, refugees, migrants from Central Europe had no such viable alternatives available. Only nearby Poland, with its vast, largely untapped economic potential, and its kings and later nobles eager to exploit it, seemed to beckon. Was Poland so different that many Jews eventually planted themselves there? Yes, says the overwhelming research. We shall now examine aspects which the book expertly presents. The book makes the case noting that, quote, the interests of the harried Jews of the Germanic lands of Central Europe and those of the embattled kings of Poland converged, end quote. This is a major distinction between Poland and the other kingdoms of Europe during the period under discussion. How did the interests of Jews match to a point with the various Polish rulers? Obviously, Jews wanted religious freedom and additionally yearned for physical safety, security, and stability. I call this SSS, essentially a refuge. Concomitantly, they yearned for greater economic opportunities than they would have had in Germanic lands or in Western and Central Europe per se. As a matter of fact, an early Polish ruler, Boleslaw the Pious, Duke of Greater Wielkopolska, issued what is called the Statute or Act of Kalisz in 1264. This is also called, by the way, the Charter of or Statute on Jewish Rights or Liberties. Yes, you heard it correctly. This was a law in 1264 in Poland. The area formerly under that duke contains remnants of some of the earliest Polish settlements. In evidence is the earliest Jewish cemetery dating back to 1287. In nearby Silesia, by the way, like the one in Breslau, Wrocław in Polish, dates back to 1203. While the Polish kings were under many pressures from the church, from urban merchant elites, artisan guilds, nobles, and gentry, in general, Jews were deemed, quote, a recognized and tolerated minority in Poland who were free men, not slaves or serfs, end quote. Indeed, unlike in many other places, they were allowed to bear arms and often use them to defend themselves and their communities. Furthermore, quote, their rights in Poland were permanent, not subject to time limits as they often were elsewhere, end quote. You heard it correctly. That's why I quoted it. Very significantly, while that unique 1264 document in Poland also enabled Jews to have their security, it served as a link in the long chain of basic charters which guaranteed the fundamental rights of Polish Jewry until the end of the Commonwealth, which ended actually in 1795. Successful Jewish enterprises served Poland well. Likewise, continuing Polish innovative laws served Jews well. Each Polish law that was amended, as in 1364 and 1367, mandated more freedom for Jews. For example, quote, any Christian who refused to heed the cries of his Jewish neighbor under attack and come to his aid would face forfeiture of all his property to the royal treasury, end quote. Also, quote, any Christian who made such an accusation and could not substantiate it with multiple both Christian and Jewish witnesses would himself be put to death, end quote. In addition, it was a practice in some European countries, even up to the 19th century, that when a Jew had to testify in a court of law, he was dehumanized in particular ways. Examples include the following. The Jew had to testify while standing on a pig hide or while balancing precariously on a three-legged stool. Other pull factors relating to Poland were significant religious laws. Unbelievable. Poland permitted in the past Jews to establish synagogues and cemeteries, as previously noted, while prior permission was from local authorities were required regarding size and location. These provisions were often ignored. Ritual slaughter regarding kosher animals was permitted, and parts unfit for kashrut was allowed to be sold to non-Jews. Even the sanctity of the Jewish Sabbath was respected, and Jews cannot be called to court on the Sabbath, on Shabbos. Cases in law between Jews and non-Jews would be adjudicated by a royal appointee, but between two Jews would be adjudicated in the community's own rabbinical courts. These were only several of the ways that Jews in Poland were treated differently than elsewhere in Europe for many generations, and was a major pull factor into Poland. Note well that Poland first adopted the laws that I just brought to your attention in the Statute or Act of Kalish in 1264, and we can clearly understand why it is called the Charter or Statute on Jewish Rights or Liberties. That Polish charter and later Polish charters became a link in the long chain of basic charters which guaranteed the fundamental rights of Polish Jewry until the end of the Commonwealth, which, as I said, lasted till 1795. Another pull factor was economic. The 1264 Statute of Kalish contributed greatly to drawing Jews into Poland, not only for enabling Jews to have personal religious freedoms, but also opening the economic system to Jews. Article 17 alone can be called an economic pull factor. Quote, and this will be a long quote. Any Jew may freely and securely walk or ride without any let or hindrance from city to city and province to province in our realm. And it goes on, and take with him his goods, property, or whatsoever merchandise he wishes, and furthermore, and sell such things and buy others. He may freely and securely delay or stay in a place of the city or town without let or hindrance, for as long as it suits him, in all the cities, towns, and villages of our realm. By our royal will, any of them, meaning the Jews, possesses security and safe conduct. It's a very different example of what happened to our relative, my Zaidi, after World War I, or before World War I. In addition, the Jew had to pay the same customary tolls as non-Jews, unlike in the rest of Europe, where there existed an additional Leisbol, a body tax for Jews. The Polish Jewish community not only grew, but also matured into a great center of Jewish learning and law, as well as of commerce. My conclusion. Until I read In Search of Polin, I never imagined that Poland was, during certain times in the past centuries, a haven for Jews. This book was an eye opener, especially for me. Why? When I was growing up, I always knew why my Zaidi, Rabbi David Tzvi, also known as Herschel Schiff, came to America from Poland. Briefly, my great grandfather, my Zaidi's father, Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Schiff, who was a shochet in his Polish town before World War One, had a minhag that before he would use a new chalif, a special knife for shechting, he would sharpen it and bring it to his Rebbe for approval. While Rabbi Chaim Schiff, I'm named after him, Cheskiyahu, was walking to his Rebbe's home, a group of men called in the book Polish brigands robbed him, and perhaps fearing that he could identify them, killed him by slitting his throat with the chalif that fell from his belt. This was before World War One. His son, Maizedi, Rav David Tzvi Schiff, decided when he had his family in the 1920s, which included 7 children, they must leave Poland. Many of Maizedi's family remained in Poland and never survived Nazi terror. Reading details about the seesaw aspect of Polish history vis-a-vis Jews living in Poland and even struggling to get there over the century provides insight into the history of our past in Europe. One of the modern changes in Poland noted in the book is that at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, they not only admit Jewish students today, but also has a Department of Jewish Studies and a Center for Holocaust Studies. Finally, it should be noted that the Hebrew meaning of the word Poland, Polin, pronounced Polin in Hebrew, means rest here. While that country may not have been considered a resting place, it was, as we have noted at times, a place of Jewish refuge. That being said, one cannot deny that a deep vein of popular religious and economic-based anti-Semitism has long existed in Poland and frequently reared its head. Even after the Holocaust, there was a pogrom, as you may know, in Kelchi in 1946. And to this day, Poland is one of the few European countries that does not pay Holocaust survivors or their heirs any reparation. Even today, some anti-Semitic sentiments are found throughout the current populist government's messaging, even though only about 10,000 Jews remain in Poland, while in 1938 existed 3 million Jews in Poland. With so few Jews in Poland, and with so many reminders of their once great presence, it is no wonder that the author subtitled his book, In Search of Polin, Chasing Jewish Ghosts in Today's Poland. Thank you very much for listening.
Do you have any questions or comments from the audience? If not, I will start.
I'd like to say thank Mel Schiff again. I always look forward to Mel, and it was a wonderful presentation, a wonderful. Thank you very much, Mel, and look forward to the next one coming up.
Well, thank you very, very much, and I really appreciate your sentiments, and it made my week, my month, and my year.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And I will throw out a comment. Maybe that will prompt others to comment also. I am a Polish Jew, born in Poland.
You're what?
A Polish Jew.
Yes.
I was born in Poland. And I was told that the reason Polish Jews prospered for a long time is there was you alluded to it. I don't know how much this has, what space it takes in your brother's book, that there was constantly a rivalry between the Polish king and his aristocrats and the Polish church. And when the king couldn't rely on the church, he invited Polish merchants, Polish Jews from all over, and they were sort of under his protection. This would explain why some of the laws, secular laws, were better in Poland than in other places. Be it as it may, it is a historical fact that after the Jews were chased from Spain, many of them went to Poland. That because the king was more friendly to them, and there was always I remember as a child when when the church would finish on Sunday, Jewish children were told to go to disappear, because after they heard the sermon, we were in danger. Mm. And the Pilsudski, the dictator of Poland, who just before World War II, just before they were invaded, was friendly to the Jews. I don't know what friendly meant at that time. Friendly still doesn't mean they were not first-class citizens, but we benefited, I was told, from the rivalry between the church and the king.
Well, first of all, what you were talking about naturally was in the 20th century, yes. and most of this book entails the previous centuries, okay. And but there was always a competition, because the king was always jealous of the aristocrats. This is in past years. Right, and the aristocrats always wanted things from the king, but you might have noticed that the punishment for I mentioned for violating certain of those old laws, the king would inherit. The king would get what the people had to pay, as punishment. But this is you have valid valid statements, but I don't believe it had covered the 20th century that much. But yes, there was always a competition between the aristocrats and the kings, right? Because the aristocrats would have certain powers and certain money, and sometimes the kings wanted it, and the way to get it was to manipulate people and their goods, right?
The church was the power.
Yeah, and the church, the church, and right, it was all connected. Okay, any other questions?
Well, I'd like to thank you so much, because you make the most difficult 900 years of Jewish history in Poland accessible. And that is a very complicated history. So whereby Professor Louis Finkelstein spent 60 years of his life writing 12 volumes on the religious and economic life of Polish Jewry. And the lucky part that we attribute to federalism and the idea how Kielce Gebirne, it's Kielce, not Kiel, and how Poland was divided and never really united, like the Federation of Italy in 1847 or Austria. Poland never got its act together, so the Jews could really travel between Great Krakow and Warsaw and Lodz, textile and all, and establish a kind of a self-sustaining shtetl. The shtetl did not have to rely too much on outsiders. The shtetl was very self. And if you had an Ilui and a child that could be trusted to go miles and miles away, in Poland, this was possible. In France or England, you know the difference, yes. So thank you for bringing Polish Jewry to an accessible book that one can really glean on how 900 years of Polish Jewry survived and thrived, you know, from all the way Roman Empire and medieval, you know, churches, troubles in the West, but it found itself a haven in Poland. Right. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to thank you very much, but all the credit goes to my brother, who is probably tuned into this, and he did the research and years of research, and he. So I want to thank you for thanking him
Thank you. Yeah.
For doing this book, and for bringing all this, so I could bring it to you.
Herschel and I led the March of the Living. Herschel was the historian on the Vamaz MTA bus, and we got to Poland. The prime minister came in Polish, welcomed us. Norman Lamb was there, and he gave us in Polish, which I still understand him, and gave us the whole line of Polish suffering and how they suffered 3, 4, 5 million, and we suffered 3 million. And they still maintain the fact that they got the brunt of the Nazi terror and the Nazi regime, and we were just a part of it. And they were really subjected to everything that Nazi Germany in Marshim Bez. So until today, too, their line is, we were in the same boat, we suffered the same, we lost the same. And I really feel their sadness when they want Jews to come to Krakow, to open up restaurants. They want a little theater and neshama and music and ruach into Warsaw, especially Krakow. Herschel and I went to the Ramah synagogue, and it was so sad to see how they cherish it, but it's empty. So again, I think the subject is very, very well. And thank you. Thank you.
I'm Rabbi Saul Schiff, Shlomo Schiff, the proud uncle of Mel and Gary. And I'm indebted to Gary for doing the brilliant work of the book, the research, marvelous research, and of Mel bringing it out in such a beautiful way. There's a scientist in Montreal who got acquainted with me somehow, who was doing research on a genetic disease in Ostro-Mazowiecki, the town where my father was born in. And through our acquaintances, I asked them about records of my family. So I said, I understand they didn't keep records in Europe. My father's born on the 6th day of Hanukkah. This one's born 4th day of Pesach. He said, it's not true. They keep records like every city in the world. And he was given permission to get records, to copy the records in their place where they kept the records. And then they asked him about my parents.
Uncle Shlomo, could you sit up, please? Sit up. You can't see your whole face.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So I asked him if he has anything about my parents. He says, how do you spell Schiff in Polish? What do I know about Polish spelling? By the way, he said, from a certain year to a certain year, everything was in Polish. The next 50 years, it was in German. They kept occupying it, they kept changing it, but they had records. So he says, do you have any other family? So I said, Feinzeig. He looked up Feinzeig, he knew. And in the Feinzeig, he found my father. Was your father's name Herschel? I said, yes. Schiff was spelled S-Z-U-F. And he found my parents were married September 10th in 1950. So this was a very informative. And I think Gary had a lot to do with getting these records from me about my family. And I appreciate your wonderful work, Mel.
And I love it too, Mel.
Thank you.
What was the town that you mentioned, the town you came from?
By the way, I gave a presentation, my book, in this shul last year. So I am indebted to you for bringing out important books.
Yes, I bought the book. It's a very interesting book.
I don't know the name of your town.
My town is Ostro-Mazowiecki.
Oh, mine was Wysoka Mazowiecki. I don't know if any.
Okay, close by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, okay, nice.
There's another Schiff on the. I have a picture of another Schiff. Would you like to see? Robert Schiff, or is it a different Schiff?
Rabbi Schiff.
Rabbi Schiff.
No, oh, RB. It's Rabbi.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
RB Schiff. RB.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm his son. I'm his
Oh.
son.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Look how nice he is.
Melvin?
That's a dove.
Hello.
Dove, how
Oh,
are you?
hi, Dad. It's very nice. Thank you. It was very
Thank
nice.
you, Dove.
It's very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Any other comments? Or should I just?
Yes.
David, would you like to speak?
Well, I have a comment. I have a question.
Who's speaking?
Robert,
Robert. Oh,
what changed in between 1794 and World War I that what the change that caused Jews to have trouble in Europe? My grandfather's from Suwałk in Poland. And what changed in the 1800s that changed the attitude of the Poles toward Jews? You mentioned until 1794, and then we know about World War II, of course. So Jews weren't, from what I've heard from Jews from Poland, they weren't too welcome in the 1800s.
Sounds like what's his name?
it was a process. It was called the Enlightenment. And as the Poles became more educated and intellectuals and intelligentsia and socialists, ideas began to form, and gradually in the 19th century became more anti-Semitic. The population became more anti-Semitic, and the less power by the royals.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one of the things that I mentioned the Episcopalians, but the period of 1740s and 50s started the worst period of Catholic-led persecution of Jews until then. So that started at the end of the 1740s and 50s.
Right.
That's when the more Catholic attacks on Jews started to occur.
Poland, you mentioned Protestantism. To my knowledge, they were very minor. Poland was the most Catholic country in the world to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're very, very pious Catholics. And so the problem is that for a long time, anti-Semitism came from the church.
Yeah. But there were times where there was some less. It's all relative. Of course, there was always anti-Semitism there, and that's why I concluded with the statement that that nevertheless, throughout all this, even to this day, anti-Semitic sentiments are found throughout the current, even today, the current popular government, as of course they still don't pay the
reparations.
reparations to the Holocaust survivors, right? And that's one of the things that is still endemic. And as a matter of fact, my brother insisted that I make sure that that we don't give the impression that there was a really nice, enjoyable thing for Jews being in Poland over the years. That is still the hardcore still exists.
Signal ends.
Okay.
Just for the completion of the picture, the Poland today insists that this was done when Poland was occupied, and therefore the occupying power was responsible, not the government. They don't accept the fact that it couldn't have happened in any other country because the population would not have tolerated it. So, okay, I would like them to admit that it was the attitude of the population that allowed the Germans to do what they did, but that's what the dispute is.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Glad everybody participated in this and people were listening. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
My brother,
And Sam, if
the Protestants declined
Sam.
Reverend